The rain drummed against the cracked pavement of Pine Street as Lydia Mae Thompson crouched down to Owen's eye level, her worn jeans soaking up the cold moisture from the sidewalk. Her light brown hair fell like a curtain around them both, creating a small sanctuary in the chaos of Seattle's evening rush. Owen's bright blue eyes were rimmed with tears, his small chest rising and falling in that familiar pattern that always made her heart skip with worry. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through her like glass. Lydia's hands trembled as she smoothed back his dark blonde hair, the same gesture she'd been making since he was a baby. Those little fingers clutched at her thrift store blouse, and she could feel the weight of every stare from the other parents picking up their children from Riverside Elementary. Their designer coats and perfect smiles seemed to mock her in the gray afternoon light. "You have me, baby. Isn't that enough?" She forced a smile. But even at 5 years old, Owen could see right through her masks. "Tommy said his dad buys him new shoes every month. He said I'm poor because my shoes have holes." Owen lifted one small foot, revealing the duct tape she'd carefully placed over the worn sole of his sneaker that morning. The words hit her harder than any physical blow could have. Lydia pulled him closer, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo, the only luxury she allowed herself to buy, because it made him smile. "You know what makes someone rich, Owen? Love. And you have more love than any kid in that whole school." But even as she said it, she could taste the lie. Love didn't pay for new shoes. Love didn't cure asthma attacks. Love didn't explain why his father had never held him, never read him bedtime stories, never taught him to ride a bike. "Can we go home now? My chest feels funny." Owen's small hand pressed against his ribs, and Lydia's trained instincts kicked in immediately. "Of course, sweetheart." She lifted him effortlessly, too effortlessly, because he was still so small for his age, and started walking toward the bus stop. The number 47 would be there in 12 minutes. She knew the schedule by heart. What Lydia didn't know was that across the street, behind the tinted windows of a black BMW, someone had been watching this entire scene unfold. Ezra James Montenegro's gray eyes never left her face as she comforted their son, the son he'd only just discovered existed. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. 5 years. 5 years of searching, of wondering, of blaming himself for whatever he'd done wrong. And now he understood why she'd vanished like smoke in the night. The child in her arms had his eyes, his stubborn chin, even the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. Ezra ran his hand through his dark hair, a habit that had intensified since the day Lydia disappeared from his life. He'd built an empire trying to fill the void she'd left behind, but sitting here now, watching her struggle with their son, he realized he'd been building it all for the wrong reasons. The bus arrived with a wheeze of brakes and diesel fumes. Lydia helped Owen up the steep steps, fishing exact change from her coat pocket, probably the last money she had until her next shift at Morrison's diner. As the bus pulled away, Ezra caught one final glimpse of Owen's face pressed against the foggy window, and in that moment, everything changed. The last customer always ordered the same thing. Lydia wiped down table 6 for the 3rd time that evening, her tired eyes drifting toward the corner booth where he sat. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He'd been coming to Morrison's diner for 2 weeks now, always arriving during her shift, always choosing the table with the perfect view of the counter where she worked. "That guy's been staring at you again," whispered Denise, the night cook, as she slid a plate of meatloaf through the service window. "Honey, he's fine as hell, but something about him gives me the creeps. Rich boys don't eat in places like this unless they want something." Lydia's hands automatically went to smooth her hair back into its messy bun, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. "He's just a customer, Denise. Mind your own business." But even as she said it, her pulse quickened. There was something familiar about the way he held his coffee cup, something in the set of his shoulders that made her stomach twist with an emotion she couldn't name. She'd been having dreams lately, fragments of memories she'd buried so deep she thought they were gone forever. "Mama's working late again tonight." The voice made her spin around, her heart nearly stopping. Owen stood in the diner's entrance, his small frame silhouetted against the neon glow of the open 24 hours sign. Mrs. Chen from apartment 3B held his hand, her weathered face creased with worry. His breathing got bad around 9. Mrs. Chen explained in her broken English. "I give him the medicine, but he keep asking for you. I'm sorry, Lydia. I know you working." Lydia rushed over, immediately placing her hand on Owen's forehead. He was warm, but not feverish. His breathing was shallow but steady, not the terrifying wheeze that sent them to the emergency room. "It's okay, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for watching him." She knelt down to Owen's level, noting how his superhero pajamas hung loose on his tiny frame. "What's wrong, baby? Did you have another nightmare?" Owen nodded, his blue eyes wide and vulnerable. "I dreamed you went away like Daddy did, and I couldn't breathe and nobody came." The words shattered something inside her chest. Lydia pulled him close, breathing in his familiar scent, strawberry shampoo mixed with the mint of his inhaler. "I'm never going anywhere, Owen. Never. You understand me?" From the corner of her eye, she noticed the man in the corner booth had gone completely still. His coffee cup sat forgotten in his hands, and she could feel the weight of his stare like a physical presence. "Can I sit at the counter while you work?" Owen asked, his small voice hopeful. "I promise I'll be good." Before Lydia could answer, a deep voice cut through the diner's ambient noise. "Excuse me." The man from the corner booth was standing now, and up close. He was even more unsettling. Tall, impeccably dressed even in casual clothes, with gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her soul. "Your son looks tired. Maybe he'd be more comfortable in a booth." His voice was smooth, controlled, but there was something underneath, something raw and desperate that made her take a step back. "We're fine, thank you," Lydia said quickly, but Owen was already looking up at the stranger with curious eyes. "You're really tall," Owen observed with the brutal honesty of a 5-year-old. "Are you a superhero? You look like one." The man's composure cracked. Just for a second, his hand went to his hair, that same gesture Lydia remembered from another lifetime, and when he looked at Owen, his expression was pure wonder, mixed with pain. "What's your name, buddy?" he asked, crouching down to Owen's level. And in that moment, as Lydia watched this stranger interact with her son, she realized with growing horror that she knew exactly who he was. The coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the linoleum floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Lydia stared at the shattered coffee cup at her feet, her mind racing faster than her heart. Ezra, after 5 years of running, of hiding, of building a life in the shadows, he had found them, found Owen. Her hands shook as she knelt to pick up the larger pieces, desperate for something to do with her trembling fingers. "Careful, you'll cut yourself," Ezra said, moving toward her with that same graceful confidence she remembered, but she flinched away from his outstretched hand like he was made of fire. "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended, sharp enough to make Owen look up from where he was still fascinated by this tall stranger. "Mama, you're bleeding," Owen pointed out, his small voice filled with concern. She looked down to see a thin line of red across her palm where a shard had caught her. The sight of blood always made Owen anxious. Too many trips to the hospital, too many needles, too many worried faces. "It's just a scratch, baby," she said, but Ezra was already pulling a pristine white handkerchief from his jacket pocket. "Here," he held it out to her, and for a moment their eyes met fully for the first time in 5 years. Gray meeting light brown, past colliding with present in a way that made the air between them crackle with unspoken words. She took the handkerchief without touching his fingers, wrapping it around her cut with practiced efficiency. "Thank you," she whispered, hating how her voice betrayed her. "My name's Owen James Thompson," her son announced proudly, apparently deciding that the adults were being far too quiet. "And I'm 5 3/4, and I have asthma, but Mama says that just makes me special." Ezra's breath caught audibly. "Owen James," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting each syllable. His middle name, the name they'd chosen together during lazy Sunday mornings when they'd dreamed about their future children, back when forever seemed possible. "What's your name?" Owen asked with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Ezra," he answered, never taking his eyes off Lydia's face. Ezra Montenegro. The name hung in the air between them like an accusation. Lydia saw the exact moment when Denise, who had been watching this drama unfold from behind the counter, put the pieces together. Her eyes widened, and she quickly busied herself with cleaning an already spotless grill. "That's a funny name," Owen giggled. "It sounds like a castle or something." "Owen, come here," Lydia said, her voice barely steady. She needed to get him away from Ezra, needed to think, needed to breathe, but Owen was already climbing onto the stool next to where Ezra stood, chattering away with the ease of a child who had never learned to fear strangers. "Mama works here every night except Sundays," Owen was explaining, And sometimes when I can't sleep, Mrs. Chen lets me come visit. Mama makes the best chocolate milk in the whole world. Do you want some? She could make you some. Owen, Lydia started, but Ezra's voice cut through hers. I'd love some chocolate milk, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made Lydia's chest tight. If it's not too much trouble. She wanted to say it was too much trouble. She wanted to grab Owen and run, the way she'd run 5 years ago when the world became too complicated and too dangerous for the life growing inside her. But Owen was looking at her with those bright blue eyes, Ezra's eyes, and she found herself nodding. Her hands shook as she prepared the chocolate milk, muscle memory taking over while her mind reeled. Behind her, she could hear Owen describing his latest drawing to Ezra, something about superheroes and secret identities. The irony wasn't lost on her. When she turned around, she found Ezra studying Owen's face with an intensity that made her stomach drop. He was seeing it now, the resemblance, the timeline, the truth she'd kept buried for 5 long years. Here's your chocolate milk, she said, setting the glass down with more force than necessary. Ezra looked up at her, and in his gray eyes, she saw a storm brewing. We need to talk, he said quietly. The parking lot behind Morrison's diner had never felt so small. Lydia tucked Owen into the back seat of Mrs. Chen's old Honda, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion after the excitement of meeting his new superhero friend. She'd managed to convince the elderly woman to take him home, promising she'd be back before midnight. Now, standing under the flickering neon sign, she felt like she was about to face a firing squad. Ezra leaned against his BMW, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin burn. The 5 years between them seemed to collapse into nothing, and suddenly she was 23 again, standing in their apartment doorway with a suitcase in her hand and lies on her lips. 5 years, Lydia. His voice was quiet, controlled, but she could hear the volcanic rage simmering underneath. 5 years I've been looking for you. 5 years I've been going crazy wondering what I did wrong, wondering if you were alive or dead or... He stopped, running his hand through his dark hair in that gesture she knew so well. And all this time, you've been raising my son. He's not... She started, but the words died in her throat. What was the point in lying now? Owen had Ezra's eyes, his stubborn chin, even his habit of tilting his head when he was thinking hard about something. Don't! Ezra's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare try to tell me he's not mine. That boy has my face, Lydia. He has my mannerisms. Hell, he even holds his head the same way I do when I'm concentrating. A cold wind whipped through the parking lot, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust fumes. Lydia wrapped her thin jacket tighter around herself, suddenly feeling every one of the sleepless nights, every double shift, every moment of terror when Owen couldn't breathe. You don't understand, she whispered. You don't know what happened that night. You don't know what your father, my father, the words exploded out of him. Oh, what the hell does my father have to do with any of this? She could see it then, the confusion, the hurt, the desperate need to understand why she'd vanished from his life like smoke. He really didn't know. After all these years, he still had no idea what his father had done. He came to see me, she said, her voice barely audible over the traffic from the main road. The night I left, I was holding the pregnancy test, trying to figure out how to tell you, and he just showed up. Ezra went very still. What did he say? He said you were planning to break up with me anyway. Said if I told you about the baby, he'd make sure I never saw my child again. He had lawyers, Ezra, money, power, and I was just a girl from the wrong side of town working at a coffee shop. Her voice broke. I was scared. So you ran. It wasn't a question. I ran, she confirmed, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. I grabbed what I could carry and I ran, because I couldn't take the chance that he was telling the truth. I couldn't risk losing my baby. Ezra was quiet for so long she wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. He's been dead for 3 years. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? My father. Heart attack in his office. I was the one who found him. He looked up at her, and she saw something break behind his gray eyes. 3 years, Lydia. You could have come back 3 years ago, and instead my son has been growing up thinking his dad didn't want him. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. He was shouting now, months of suppressed emotion finally boiling over. Because you never gave me a chance to fight for you. You never gave me a chance to prove that I would have chosen you over him, over the money, over everything. She flinched, as if he'd struck her, because deep down, in the part of her heart she'd tried to ignore, she knew he was right. She'd been so afraid of losing Owen that she'd stolen Ezra's chance to be a father. "I was protecting him," she said weakly. "From what? From having a father who loves him? From having enough money for decent shoes and proper medical care?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "From having a family." The words hung between them like a blade. In the distance, she could hear the rumble of thunder, promising another storm. "What do you want from me, Ezra?" she asked, her voice raw with exhaustion. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else, something that looked dangerously like hope. "I want to know my son," he said simply. And somewhere in the darkness, thunder rolled closer. The knock on her apartment door came at exactly 9 in the morning. Lydia had been expecting it, dreading it, preparing for it since she'd given Ezra her address 3 days ago. Through the peephole, she could see him standing in the narrow hallway of Greenwood Apartments, holding a small wrapped box and looking like he belonged anywhere but here. His expensive coat seemed out of place against the faded wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights. "Owen, breakfast," she called, smoothing her hands down her worn jeans. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on the least shabby outfit she owned. Not that it mattered. Ezra had seen her at her worst plenty of times before. "Is that the superhero man?" Owen asked, appearing in the living room with his hair sticking up in 6 different directions and his favorite dinosaur pajamas hanging loose on his small frame. "His name is Ezra, remember?" She opened the door, and immediately the apartment felt smaller, shabbier, more inadequate than ever before. Ezra's gray eyes took in everything: the second-hand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, the medical supplies neatly organized on the coffee table. When his gaze landed on Owen's nebulizer machine, something flickered across his face that might have been pain. "Good morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I brought you something." Owen's eyes lit up as he accepted the small package. Inside was a set of colored pencils, not the cheap waxy kind from the dollar store, but real artist's pencils in every color imaginable. Owen's gasp of delight made Lydia's chest tight. "These are the best crayons ever," Owen breathed, already pulling one out to examine it. "They're called colored pencils," Ezra corrected gently, crouching down to Owen's level. "Artists use them to create beautiful pictures. I thought maybe you could show me some of your superhero drawings." Lydia watched her son's face transform with pure joy and felt her careful defenses start to crumble. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Owen getting attached to this man who could disappear from their lives as suddenly as he'd entered it. "I'll get my drawings." Owen raced toward his bedroom, leaving the 2 adults alone in the cramped living room. "You don't have to buy his affection," Lydia said quietly, her arms crossed over her chest. "I'm not trying to buy anything." Ezra's voice was patient, measured. "I'm trying to get to know my son. There's a difference." Before she could respond, Owen was back, dragging a shoebox full of papers. He dumped them on the coffee table, sorting through them with the serious concentration of a museum curator. "This is Superman, and this is Batman, and this one is Captain America," he explained, holding up each drawing for Ezra's inspection. "But this one is my favorite." The drawing he handed over made Ezra go very still. It showed 3 stick figures: a woman with long brown hair, a small boy, and a tall man with dark hair. They were all holding hands, and each figure wore a cape. "That's my family," Owen explained matter-of-factly. "Mama, me, and my daddy. I gave us all superpowers so we could protect each other." Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes. In all his drawings, in all his innocent fantasies, Owen had always included a father figure. Even though he'd never met Ezra, some part of him had been waiting, hoping, believing that somewhere out there was a man who belonged in their little family. "Can you tell me about your daddy's superpowers?" Ezra asked, his voice carefully controlled. "He's really strong, and he can fix things when they're broken," Owen said, pointing to the cape he'd drawn on the tall figure. "And he makes Mama not sad anymore." The words hit both adults like a physical blow. Lydia turned away, busying herself with clearing breakfast dishes that were already clean. She couldn't let Owen see her cry. She couldn't let him know that his innocent words had just shattered something inside her chest. "Owen," Ezra said slowly, "what if I told you that I might be your daddy?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Lydia spun around, her heart hammering. Ezra. But Owen was already looking between them with those two wise blue eyes. I know, he said simply. You have the same eyes as me, and you smell like Mama's old photo. Lydia's blood ran cold. What photo, baby? Owen scrambled off the couch and ran to his bedroom again. When he came back, he was holding a small, crumpled photograph that Lydia thought she'd thrown away years ago. It was a picture of her and Ezra at the Pike Place market, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. She was wearing his cologne that day. I found it in your jewelry box, Owen admitted. I kept it because the man looked nice and you looked happy. Ezra took the photograph with trembling hands, and Lydia saw 5 years of searching, of wondering, of grieving crystallize in his expression. When he looked up at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Is it true, Mama? Owen asked, his voice small and hopeful. Is he really my daddy? And for the first time in 5 years, Lydia couldn't find the strength to lie. The word yes fell from her lips like a stone into still water. Owen's face transformed instantly, lighting up with a joy so pure it took Lydia's breath away. But before she could process what she'd just done, what door she'd just opened, Owen launched himself into Ezra's arms with the fearless trust that only children possess. I knew it. Owen's voice was muffled against Ezra's shoulder. I knew you were my daddy. That's why you felt familiar, like coming home. Ezra's arms came around his son awkwardly at first, then tighter, like he was afraid Owen might disappear if he let go. When he looked up at Lydia over Owen's head, she saw something break and rebuild in his gray eyes all at once. Easy there, buddy, Ezra whispered, his voice thick. And let me look at you. He held Owen at arm's length, taking in every detail, the way his nose crinkled when he smiled, the small scar on his chin from when he'd fallen off his bike last summer, the faint wheeze in his breathing that never quite went away. Do you want to see my room? Owen asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. I have a whole collection of superhero figures. Well, some of them are broken, but Mama says broken things can still be special. I'd love to see your room, Ezra said, but his eyes never left Lydia's face. As Owen dragged his father down the narrow hallway, chattering about his toys and his drawings and his favorite bedtime stories, Lydia sank onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. What had she done? 5 years of careful protection, of keeping Owen safe from a world that could hurt him, and she'd just blown it all apart with one word. Mama, come see, Owen's voice called from his bedroom. Daddy needs to know about Mr. Whiskers. Daddy. The word hit her like a physical blow. How easily it had rolled off Owen's tongue, like he'd been practicing it his whole life. She found them sitting on Owen's small bed, Ezra holding a worn stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Mr. Whiskers had been Owen's constant companion since he was 2, through every hospital visit, every sleepless night, every moment when the world felt too big and scary. Mr. Whiskers helps me breathe when my chest gets tight, Owen was explaining seriously. Mama says he has special powers that make the scary feelings go away. Ezra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Do you get scared a lot, Owen? Sometimes, when I can't breathe good, or when Mama has to work really late and I think maybe she won't come back. Owen's voice was matter-of-fact, but Lydia saw the way Ezra's knuckles went white where they gripped the stuffed rabbit. Your Mama always comes back, Ezra said quietly. She loves you more than anything in the world. I know, but sometimes I wish I had a daddy to help take care of her too. She gets really tired, and sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. The observation, delivered with devastating childhood honesty, made both adults go very still. Lydia felt heat flood her cheeks. She'd thought she'd been so careful, so good at hiding her struggles from Owen. Well, Ezra said slowly, now you do have a daddy, and daddies are very good at taking care of both little boys and their mamas. Owen's face lit up again. Really? You're going to stay forever? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ezra looked up at Lydia, and she saw something desperate and determined in his expression. If your mama will let me, he said quietly. Before Lydia could respond, Owen was already moving on to the next exciting revelation. Can I call you Daddy now? Or do I have to call you Ezra? Tommy at school says some kids have to call their daddies by their first names if they're not married to their mamas. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Ezra said, but his eyes were still fixed on Lydia's face. Daddy feels right, Owen decided with the swift certainty of childhood. Daddy, do you want to see my inhaler? It's blue and it makes me feel better when I can't breathe. As Owen rummaged through his nightstand drawer, Ezra stood and moved closer to Lydia. When he spoke, His voice was low enough that Owen couldn't hear. "We need to talk about his medical care. About everything. I want to help, Lydia. I want to be here. You can't just walk in here and fix everything," she whispered back. "It's not that simple. Maybe not. But I can try." His hand almost reached for hers, then stopped. "Let me try." Owen triumphantly held up his rescue inhaler, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. "See? It's got a superhero sticker on it. Mama says it makes me brave like Captain America." And watching her son show his father the tools that kept him alive, Lydia realized that maybe, just maybe, being brave meant letting someone else help carry the weight of their world. The school playground had never felt like a battlefield before. Lydia watched from the chain-link fence as Owen ran toward the swings, his new backpack bouncing against his small shoulders. It was his first day back at Riverside Elementary since Ezra had entered their lives 2 weeks ago, and she could see the difference in her son's posture, straighter, more confident, like he was carrying some invisible shield. "Mrs. Thompson," the voice behind her made her turn. Principal Martinez approached with that carefully neutral expression that always made Lydia's stomach clench with worry. "Is everything okay?" she asked automatically, her eyes already scanning the playground for Owen. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about Owen's situation." Ms. Martinez glanced at her clipboard. "One of our teachers noticed he's been talking about his father quite a bit lately. We just want to make sure there haven't been any significant changes at home that might affect his learning environment." Heat flooded Lydia's cheeks. Of course Owen had been talking. For 2 weeks straight, every conversation had started with, "My daddy says," or "Daddy's going to teach me how to." She'd tried to prepare him for questions, but explaining complicated adult situations to a 5-year-old was like trying to hold water in a colander. "His father has recently become more involved in his life," she said carefully. "It's a positive change." "I see." Ms. Martinez made a note on her clipboard. "And this father figure, is he planning to be a permanent presence? We like to know about family dynamics for emergency contact purposes." Before Lydia could answer, a commotion near the monkey bars caught their attention. Owen was standing toe-to-toe with Tommy Richardson, the same boy who'd made fun of his shoes weeks ago. But this time, Owen wasn't backing down. "My daddy could buy 1,000,000 pairs of shoes," Owen was saying, his small hands clenched into fists. "And he's really tall and strong and he knows how to fix computers and cars and everything. You don't have a daddy?" Tommy shot back. "My mom says your mom is a liar and that's why you live in the poor apartments." Lydia was already moving toward them when she heard the voice that made her freeze mid-step. "Actually, he does have a daddy." Ezra emerged from behind the school building, having apparently cut through the parking lot. He was dressed down for him, jeans and a simple gray sweater, but he still managed to look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Every parent on the playground turned to stare. "Daddy!" Owen's face exploded with joy as he launched himself toward Ezra. "You came. I told Tommy you were real." Ezra caught Owen easily, lifting him up like he weighed nothing. "Of course I'm real, buddy. And I heard someone was giving you trouble about your shoes." Tommy Richardson, who had been so bold a moment before, suddenly looked very small next to Ezra's imposing presence. I didn't mean—" "What's your name, son?" Ezra asked, his voice kind but firm. "Tommy," the boy mumbled. "Well, Tommy, I think you owe Owen an apology. And maybe next time, instead of making fun of someone's shoes, you could invite them to play with you instead. What do you think?" Tommy nodded quickly and mumbled an apology before scurrying away toward his mother, who was watching the entire scene with wide eyes and an open mouth. "Daddy, can you stay and watch me on the swings?" Owen asked, his arms wrapped around Ezra's neck like he never wanted to let go. "Actually," Ezra said, glancing over at Lydia, "I was hoping to talk to your mama first. Think you can show me how high you can swing all by yourself?" Owen nodded eagerly and ran off toward the swings, leaving the adults standing in the awkward aftermath of a very public family moment. "Mr. Principal Martinez stepped forward with professional curiosity. "Montenegro. Ezra Montenegro." He extended his hand. "Owen's father." "I see. And you're planning to be more involved in Owen's school life?" "Very involved," Ezra said, his gray eyes finding Lydia's face. "In fact, I was hoping to discuss some options for Owen's medical care and educational needs. I understand he's been struggling with attendance due to his asthma." Ms. Martinez's eyebrows rose. "Well, yes, but that's really a conversation for his parents," Ezra finished smoothly, "which is why I'm here." Lydia felt the weight of every stare on the playground, heard the whispered conversations starting among the other parents. News traveled fast in communities like this, and by tomorrow everyone would know that Owen Thompson's mysterious father had finally shown up, and that he was clearly wealthy, handsome, and very much invested in his son's life. "Mama, look," Owen called from the swings. "I'm flying. Daddy, are you watching?" "I'm watching," Ezra called back, and the smile that spread across his face was so genuine, so full of wonder and pride, that it made Lydia's chest ache. This was what she'd stolen from both of them. This moment, this connection, this simple joy of a father watching his son play. 5 years of moments just like this one. "We should probably continue this conversation in my office," Mrs. Martinez suggested, clearly sensing the undercurrents she didn't understand. But as they walked toward the school building, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that everything was moving too fast, spinning out of her control. Owen was already so attached, so hopeful. And Ezra was looking at them like they were the answer to a prayer he'd been whispering for years. What happened when prayers came true, but you weren't sure you deserved the miracle? The medical bill arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. Lydia stared at the envelope from Seattle Children's Hospital, her hands trembling as she tore it open. The numbers on the page blurred together. Charges for Owen's emergency room visit last month, the one where his asthma attack had been so severe she'd thought she was going to lose him. Even with her basic insurance, the amount due was more than she made in 3 months. "Mama, why are you crying?" Owen's voice made her look up from where she sat at their tiny kitchen table. He was holding Mr. Whiskers and wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas, the ones with holes in the knees that she kept meaning to replace. "I'm not crying, baby," she lied, quickly wiping her eyes. "Just something in my eye." But Owen wasn't fooled. At 5 years old, he'd already learned to read the signs of adult worry. He climbed into her lap, his small arms wrapping around her neck with the fierce protectiveness that sometimes broke her heart. "Is it about money again?" he asked quietly. "Are we going to have to move?" The question gutted her. He was too young to understand finances, but he'd overheard enough hushed phone calls with landlords and bill collectors to know that money was always the monster lurking in their closet. "No, sweetheart, we're not going anywhere." Another lie. She'd already gotten the notice that their rent was increasing next month. With this medical bill on top of everything else, the knock on their door came at exactly that moment, like fate had been waiting in the wings. Through the peephole, she could see Ezra holding a bag from Owen's favorite bakery and wearing that soft gray sweater that made his eyes look like storm clouds. "Daddy!" Owen scrambled off her lap and ran to unlock the door. In the 3 weeks since the playground incident, this had become their routine. Ezra stopping by most mornings before work, bringing breakfast and spending an hour with Owen before heading to his office downtown. "Good morning, buddy," Ezra said, catching Owen in a hug that lifted him off the ground. "I brought those chocolate croissants you like, the ones with the little sugar crystals on top." Owen's face lit up with pure joy. "Those are the ones." Ezra's eyes found Lydia's over Owen's head, and she saw his expression change instantly. "Lydia, what's wrong?" She tried to school her features into neutrality, but it was too late. Ezra had always been able to read her like an open book, and apparently 5 years hadn't changed that. "Nothing. Just tired." She attempted a smile. "Like Owen. Go wash your hands for breakfast." As soon as Owen disappeared into the bathroom, Ezra was beside her, his hand gently touching her shoulder. "Don't lie to me. You look like you've seen a ghost." The kindness in his voice was her undoing. Before she could stop herself, she was shoving the medical bill toward him, her carefully constructed walls crumbling like sand castles in a storm. $13,000, she whispered, for one night in the hospital. One night, Ezra, and that's after insurance. She watched him scan the document, saw his jaw tighten as he took in the details, the itemized charges for oxygen therapy, chest x-rays, nebulizer treatments, the overnight observation that had turned into 2 days when Owen's breathing hadn't stabilized fast enough. "Lydia," he started, but she was already shaking her head. Please don't say whatever you're about to say. I know what you're thinking, that you could write a check and make this disappear, but I can't. I won't be charity case." "Charity?" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "He's my son. This isn't charity. It's responsibility. It's what I should have been doing all along. You didn't know, but I know now." Ezra set the bill down carefully, like it might explode. "How many other bills are there, Lydia?" How many times has he been sick and I wasn't there to help? The question hung between them like an accusation. Too many times. Too many nights in emergency rooms. Too many desperate calls to find babysitters who wouldn't mind dealing with a sick child. Too many times she'd had to choose between Owen's medications and groceries. Mama, Daddy, come see what I drew. Owen's voice called from the living room, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in the kitchen. They found him at the coffee table, carefully coloring with the artist pencils Ezra had given him. The drawing showed 3 figures again, but this time they weren't stick people. Owen had taken great care with the details. A woman with long brown hair and sad eyes, a tall man in a suit, and a small boy holding both their hands. At the bottom, in his careful kindergarten handwriting, he'd written, "My family. It's beautiful, Owen," Ezra said, his voice thick with emotion. "I made Mama not sad in this picture," Owen explained proudly, "because when families are together, nobody has to be sad anymore." Lydia felt something crack inside her chest. Her son's innocent faith in the power of family, his absolute belief that love could fix everything, was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "Owen," she said carefully, "you know that sometimes even when families love each other very much, things can still be complicated, right?" Owen tilted his head, considering this with the seriousness of a philosopher. "But Daddy's rich, right? Rich people can fix complicated things." The simple statement, delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence, made both adults freeze, out of the mouths of babes. "Money can't fix everything, buddy," Ezra said gently. "But it can fix some things," Owen insisted. "Like when I get sick, money can buy the medicine that makes me breathe better." And there it was, the truth that Lydia had been trying to avoid. Money couldn't buy love or guarantee happiness, but it could buy Owen the medical care he needed. It could buy him a future without fear, without the constant anxiety of wondering if they could afford his next doctor's visit. "Lydia," Ezra said quietly, "we need to talk, really talk, about all of this." She looked at the medical bill on the table, then at Owen's drawing of their perfect family, then at the man who had once been her whole world, and might be again. And for the first time in 5 years, she nodded. The words, "I can't breathe," would haunt her forever. It started during Owen's afternoon nap, 3 days after their conversation about the medical bills. Lydia was folding laundry when she heard the sound that made every mother's blood run cold. The wet, desperate wheeze of her child fighting for air. She found Owen sitting up in bed, his small chest working overtime, his lips already showing that telltale blue tinge that meant they were running out of time. His rescue inhaler sat empty on the nightstand, used up during a mild attack that morning. "It's okay, baby. Mama's here." Her voice was steady even as her hands shook, reaching for her phone to call 911. But as she lifted Owen into her arms, he went completely limp. The next few hours blurred together in a nightmare of sirens, fluorescent lights, and medical terms she didn't understand. Severe asthma exacerbation, respiratory distress, oxygen saturation dropping. The doctors at Seattle Children's Hospital worked with controlled urgency, while Lydia stood helplessly in the corner, watching machines breathe for her son. She'd called Ezra from the ambulance, her words barely coherent through her panic. He'd arrived at the hospital still wearing his business suit, his usually perfect hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. "How is he?" he asked, and she saw her own terror reflected in his gray eyes. They're talking about intubation," she whispered. "If the breathing treatments don't work." The word hung between them like a death sentence. Neither of them could finish the thought. Dr. Harrison, Owen's pulmonologist, emerged from the treatment room looking exhausted. "We've managed to stabilize him for now, but this attack was severe, more severe than anything we've seen from him before." "What does that mean?" Ezra asked, his voice tight with control. "It means his asthma is progressing. The standard treatments aren't as effective as they used to be." Dr. Harrison glanced between them, clearly sensing the family dynamics he didn't fully understand. "There's an experimental treatment program at Boston Children's Hospital. It's shown remarkable results in cases like Owen's, but what?" Lydia demanded. "It's expensive, even with insurance. We're talking about $150,000 over the course of a year, and that doesn't include travel and accommodation costs for the family." The number hit Lydia like a physical blow. $150,000. She made $18,000 a year at the diner. It might as well have been $1 million. "When would he need to start?" Ezra asked quietly. Ideally, within the next 2 weeks, before we see another attack like this one. As Dr. Harrison left to check on other patients, Lydia sank into the plastic chair beside Owen's bed. Her son looked so small against the white hospital sheets, oxygen cannula tucked under his nose, monitors beeping rhythmically around him. "We'll figure it out," Ezra said, but she was already shaking her head. "No, we won't, because there is no we, Ezra. There's me, struggling to keep my son alive on minimum wage and expired insurance. And there's you, swooping in like some white knight thinking money can fix 5 years of damage. Lydia, I've been doing this alone for 5 years." The words exploded out of her. 5 years of exhaustion and fear and frustration finally finding their voice. Do you know what it's like to lie awake at night wondering if your child is going to stop breathing? Do you know what it's like to count pills and ration medications because you can't afford refills? Ezra's face went white. "No, I don't. Because you never gave me the chance to find out." The accusation hung in the air between them. Other families in the pediatric ICU were dealing with their own crises, their own impossible decisions, and here they were fighting over ancient history while their son fought for every breath. "I was 23 and terrified," she whispered. "Your father threatened to take my baby away from me. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to trust me." His voice broke on the words. "You were supposed to know that I would have fought for you, for us, for him." Before she could respond, Owen's eyes fluttered open. "Mama." His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from the breathing treatments. "I'm here, baby." She was beside his bed in an instant, taking his small hand in hers. "Is Daddy here too?" Owen's blue eyes searched the room until they found Ezra standing by the window. "I'm here, buddy," Ezra said, moving to the other side of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," Owen admitted with the brutal honesty of childhood. "The doctor said I might have to go to a different hospital, far away." Lydia saw the exact moment when Ezra made his decision, his jaw set with that familiar determination she remembered from their college days, when he'd decided to start his first business with nothing but a laptop and audacious dreams. "Owen," Ezra said, taking his son's other hand, "what if I told you that Daddy could make sure you got the best treatment possible? What if I could make sure you never had to be this scared again?" Owen's eyes widened. "You can do that. I can try. But it would mean some big changes. For all of us." Lydia felt the walls closing in around her. She knew what he was offering. Financial security, medical care, a future for Owen that she could never provide on her own. But accepting it would mean admitting that love wasn't enough, that sometimes the best thing you could do for your child was let someone else save them. "Di, what kind of changes?" Owen asked, completely unaware that his question was about to reshape their entire world. And as Ezra looked across their son's hospital bed at her, Lydia realized she was about to find out. The silence in the hospital room was broken only by the steady beep of Owen's heart monitor. Lydia stared at the custody papers in her hands, the black ink swimming before her tear-filled eyes. Ezra sat across from her in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his expensive suit wrinkled from 3 days of sleeping in the hospital, his usually perfect hair a mess from running his hands through it. "You want me to sign away my parental rights," she whispered, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "That's not what this is," Ezra said, his voice raw with exhaustion. "This is about making sure Owen gets the treatment he needs. The doctors in Boston won't start the program without proof of financial stability and legal guardianship. My lawyers say this is the fastest way." "Your lawyers." The words came out bitter. "Of course. Just like your father." Ezra flinched as if she'd slapped him. Don't you dare compare me to him. Everything I'm doing is for Owen. For you. For me." Lydia's voice rose, then immediately dropped when Owen stirred in his sleep. "You're asking me to give up my son? I'm asking you to save him." Ezra leaned forward, his gray eyes desperate. "Lydia, you heard what Dr. Harrison said. Without this treatment, Owen's next attack could be his last. Can you live with that? Can you really sit here and let your pride kill our son?" The accusation hit her like a physical blow. She looked at Owen, so small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, the oxygen cannula still taped under his nose. In sleep, he looked even younger than his 5 years, his dark blonde hair falling across his forehead in a way that reminded her painfully of Ezra. "I've been keeping him alive for 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years of midnight trips to the emergency room, of counting every pill, of working double shifts to pay for medications, I didn't let my pride do anything except protect him when no one else would. And you did an incredible job, Ezra said, his voice breaking. But Lydia, love isn't enough anymore. It's not enough to keep him breathing. The truth of his words settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She'd always known this day might come, the day when her love, her determination, her sheer force of will wouldn't be enough to keep Owen safe. If I sign these papers, she said slowly, what happens to me? You come with us. To Boston. We do this together. As what? Your employee? Your charity case? Ezra was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. As my family. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. 5 years of hurt, of secrets, of missed chances stood in the way like an impassable chasm. Ezra, she started, but he held up a hand. I know I have no right to ask. I know I lost that right the day I let my father control my life instead of fighting for you. But Owen deserves parents who can work together. He deserves a father who can pay for his medicine, and a mother who knows every one of his fears and dreams. And what do I deserve? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. You deserve to be loved the way I should have loved you 5 years ago. Completely without conditions, without letting anyone else's opinion matter more than what we have together. Lydia felt tears streaming down her cheeks. What if it's too late? What if too much has happened? Then we figure it out, day by day, but together. Ezra's hand reached across the space between their chairs, palm up, waiting. Please, Lydia. Let me be the father Owen needs. Let me be the man you needed me to be. Before she could respond, Owen's eyes fluttered open. Mama, why are you crying? She quickly wiped her tears, forcing a smile. Happy tears, baby. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy. Are you happy because Daddy's going to take care of us? Owen asked with the devastating intuition of childhood. Lydia looked at her son, then at Ezra, then at the papers that represented both her greatest fear and Owen's only hope. In her mind, she could hear Owen's labored breathing from earlier, could see the blue tinge around his lips, could feel the terror of almost losing him. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mama's happy because Daddy's going to take care of us. She picked up the pen with trembling fingers and signed her name at the bottom of the custody papers, not because she was giving up her son, but because she was giving him a chance at the life she could never provide alone. Does this mean we're going to be a real family now? Owen asked, his small hand reaching for both of theirs. Ezra's fingers intertwined with Lydia's for the first time in 5 years, and she felt something broken inside her chest begin to heal. Yes, buddy, Ezra said, his voice thick with emotion. We're going to be a real family. And for the first time since Owen had been born, Lydia believed that maybe, just maybe, love could be enough when it was backed by sacrifice, forgiveness, and the courage to try again. Outside the hospital window, Seattle's rain began to ease, and somewhere in the distance the sun broke through the clouds. 2 years later, the sound of laughter filled the backyard of their home in Bellevue. Lydia watched from the kitchen window as Owen chased Ezra around the maple tree they'd planted last spring, both of them covered in dirt from their afternoon gardening project. Owen's breathing was clear and strong, his cheeks flushed with health rather than the pale exhaustion she'd grown accustomed to. The experimental treatment in Boston had worked better than anyone had dared to hope. Mama, Daddy's being a dragon again, Owen called, his voice carrying easily across the yard. At 7 years old, he was taller, stronger, more confident than she'd ever imagined possible. The scared little boy with holes in his shoes felt like a memory from another lifetime. Tell Daddy that dragons need to wash their hands before dinner, she called back, unable to suppress her smile. The house around her was filled with the comfortable chaos of a real family. Owen's artwork covered the refrigerator, his shoes were scattered by the front door, and his latest obsession, a collection of rocks he'd declared were magic crystals, lined the windowsill in his bedroom upstairs. It hadn't been easy, those first months in Boston, learning to trust again, learning to let someone else share the burden of Owen's care, learning to accept help without feeling like she was losing herself. There had been fights, tears, moments when she'd wanted to pack up and run back to their tiny apartment in Seattle, but there had also been mornings when she'd woken up and realized she wasn't alone anymore. Evenings when Ezra would take Owen to his doctor's appointments without being asked. Nights when the three of them would pile onto the couch to watch superhero movies. Owen curled between them like he'd always belonged there. The back door opened, and Ezra stepped inside. Owen riding piggyback despite being far too big for it. Both of them were grinning, dirt smudged across their faces like matching war paint. "The garden is officially ready for summer," Ezra announced, sliding Owen down to stand on his own feet. "And your son has decided he wants to grow his own strawberries." "Our son," Lydia corrected automatically, the way she had been for 2 years now. It had taken time, but the word "our" had gradually replaced "my" in her vocabulary. "Our son," Ezra agreed, his gray eyes soft with the kind of contentment she'd never thought she'd see in them again. Owen bounded over to her, throwing his arms around her waist with the casual affection of a child who had never doubted his place in the world. "Mama, guess what? Daddy said when the strawberries grow, we can make jam together, and we can give some to Mrs. Patterson next door because she gave us cookies." "That sounds perfect to me, sweetheart," Lydia said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. No wheezing, no labored breathing, just the normal exertion of a healthy child at play. Later that evening, after Owen had been tucked into bed with Mr. Whiskers and a news story about brave knights and dragon friends, Lydia and Ezra sat on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I found something today," Ezra said quietly, pulling a small, crumpled photograph from his wallet. It was the same picture Owen had kept hidden for years, the one of them at Pike Place Market, young and laughing, and completely unaware of the heartbreak that lay ahead. "He gave it back to me last week," Ezra continued. "I said he didn't need to keep it hidden anymore because now he has the real thing." Lydia took the photo with careful fingers, studying their younger selves. They looked so impossibly young, so certain that love would be enough to conquer anything. In a way, maybe it had been. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" she asked. "If I hadn't run? If your father hadn't?" "Every day," Ezra admitted. "But then I watch Owen in the garden, or see him helping you make breakfast, or listen to him tell stories about his day at school, and I think maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to, even the 5 years apart. Especially the 5 years apart." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You needed to know you could raise him on your own. I needed to become the kind of man who was worthy of being his father. And Owen needed to understand that love isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you choose, every day, even when it's hard." From inside the house, they could hear Owen's voice drifting down from his bedroom, talking to Mr. Whiskers about their plans for tomorrow's adventure. Normal childhood sounds from a normal, healthy child. "I love you," Lydia said suddenly, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. "I know we've been taking things slow, and I know there's still so much we need to figure out, but I love you. I never stopped loving you." Ezra's hand found hers in the growing darkness, their fingers intertwining the way they had that night in the hospital when they'd chosen to be a family. "I love you too," he said simply. "Both of you. More than I ever thought possible." Above them, the first stars began to appear in the Seattle sky, and somewhere in the distance, Owen's laughter echoed through the house like a promise that some stories, even the broken ones, could find their way to happily ever after. The boy who had once drawn pictures of a family with superpowers had finally gotten his wish, not because they could fly or had magic spells, but because they had learned the most powerful superpower of all, the courage to love completely, forgive deeply, and trust that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. And in the quiet of their backyard, surrounded by the home they'd built together from the broken pieces of their past, they knew that sometimes the best endings were really just new beginnings in disguise. What would you have done in Lydia's position? And if you had a chance to rewrite your own story, what ending would you choose? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.